Today we have David Schneer, who is the co-founder and CEO of Merrill Research, where he combines advanced qualitative research techniques with nonverbal intelligence and AI to help companies bring new products to market and refine their strategic communications. Schneer's personal story is one of resilience and innovation, culminating in the release of his book, Backbone. The book explores 7 essential traits for qualitative research, which are curiosity, extroversion, preparedness, synthesizing complexity, effective communication, grit, and venturousness. He weaves these principles with a gripping personal narrative of surviving a vicious attack on Christmas Eve, which left him paralyzed, following 5 grueling spinal surgeries between 2016 to 2023. Schneer's passion for understanding human behavior and strategic communication makes his book a must read for those in market research, product development, and corporate leadership. Hello, David. How are you today?
I am fine, my friend. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show. I'm really looking forward to this. I know you've got the book that's coming out on Backbone, and we're going to be talking through that a lot in the show. But I do want to find out about Merrill Research as well. Really looking forward to it. Thank you for being on the show. First question I ask to all of my guests is, what does a business mindset mean to you?
I have a different perspective on that. I come at the business mindset through people mindset because when people say, hey, it's just business, right? That's not true. It's not just business. It's not as if two brick and mortar companies lean in and discuss things. It's the people in there. I'm less of a bottom line guy and more of a people guy. And I believe that if you treat your employees well and you're good at what you do, the business will follow.
Yeah, it's really interesting you talk about people because a lot of people are very much worried about the bottom line, about profitability and how to scale businesses. But if you don't have great people servicing your clients, working with your clients, growing that business that way, I actually think sometimes like the striving for the bottom line number actually is irrelevant because you haven't got the right people in place to make it sustainable.
That is correct. We don't have to look too far in recent history to realize 4.5 million people in this country told their bosses to take this job and shove it. And there's toxicity, bad behavior, and you got to learn to navigate that. And that's what the book talks about, is having some empathy
And
and how
I
to
think in leadership, empathy is so important.
right up
Emotional
there.
intelligence, like we never, like I think when I started my corporate career in 2007, that whole idea of emotional intelligence and empathy wasn't wasn't really like I remember like partners throwing pens and throwing staplers at people. And over the years, so I worked there for 12 years at PwC, there was definitely a shift in how leaders had to express themselves and explain themselves, which I think has done a positive thing for business because people there's a higher level of what people need to how people respond to their leaders as well.
I'd be lying to you if I told you I didn't throw a stapler or two. And the whole reason that honestly, the whole reason that I started this business was so that I wouldn't have to work for people like me. No, I'm serious. And it's been almost 40 years now. Despite myself, we're still Darwinian, last man
Yeah,
standing.
you're doing great. You're doing great. Right, next question. Tell me one thing about your upbringing which reflects on who you are today.
Oh, that's such a great question. The first chapter in the book is entitled Curiosity, and what it boils down to is when I was growing up, I was constantly the new kid on the block. My father had dragged us from the East Coast to the West Coast, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And each time we drove across the country,
Oh, right.
and each time I had a new sibling each time we did this, right? So here we are, packed in a station wagon, driving across the country, and I'm in and out of school. So I was always a new kid. And so I survived by keeping my mouth shut and my eyes open and
Mm.
trying to straddle the groups there. And I did quite well doing that.
So I was having this conversation. I've got a friend of mine who lives in Chicago at the moment. He's thinking of moving to the West Coast. And we were having this like sort of theoretical discussion about East Coast and West Coast and the different mentalities that in America the East Coast and West Coast have. So you've had that experience as a child as well. So you saw it in child's eyes. Like this is a bit of a random question, but what's your view on East Coast, West Coast mentality in the US?
Well, I was born in New York and I still have relatives on the East Coast. And I spent a lot of time on the East Coast. And I've been in California since I was 12. A lot of transplants here, so it's hard to tell. But generally, in the research studies, whenever we want to do the acid test, with a product or a concept, we take it to New York because they don't hold back. And New
Right.
Yorkers will tell you what they think of your product and you. So it's a tough market. So and in California, you just can't ignore it. But we do a lot of times because to test technology concepts here in Silicon Valley is everybody knows Silicon Valley and technology
Mm,
here on the
mm,
West Coast,
mm.
right? So it's a little atypical responses here than you would. So we generally go away outside of
Right,
the West Coast
right.
in my line of
Gotcha.
business.
Yeah. So as a researcher, you blend qualitative measures methods with non-verbal intelligence. Just in Merrill Research, just talk me through that recognizing of body language and how important it is for your company.
It's everything really. And it's one of the most important things I think that we can do in qualitative research. Look, since the pandemic, everything has changed about research in general and qualitative research in specific. A lot of in person focus group facilities went away. You couldn't meet with customers in person, everything went virtual. So the entire landscape of qualitative research has been decimated by the pandemic. There's only one thing that hasn't changed, one thing, and that is moderators, interviewers like me, still rely too much on the spoken word.
Mm,
And we've been capturing a lot of emotion that doesn't line up with what people say in
right.
our research because of our ability to determine when somebody seems uncomfortable in answering a question. Doesn't mean they're lying, just
Yeah.
means that something about it is untoward.
So let's go back to research 101. So my audience are business owners that are growing their business. So
Right.
just talk me through the difference between qualitative and quantitative research, because some people might not be aware of it, and how you incorporate that in Merrill Research.
Great question. Probably should have started there. But uh, it's very important because if your viewers want to grow their businesses and scale their businesses, they're going to need to talk to their customers. I work with multi-billion-dollar companies that have huge pipelines in R&D of products or services, and they can't afford to launch them all, so they come to me to help, right? And so we employ different types of research. Now let's take a look at the research world. Overall, in research, there's two major facets of research. There's secondary research and primary research, okay? Secondary research is information that exists in the public domain. When you go to the library, when you go to Google, when you search Nexus, Lexis, or an online information retrieval system,
Yeah.
that information already exists. Okay. Then there's primary research. And primary research is the art of gathering information that does not exist. That means we have to go out and find this information. And companies pay us to do this. And there's two methodologies. One is the the methodology of surveys and quantitative research that most people understand because we have elections coming up and people are paying
Yeah.
attention to the polls, right?
Yeah.
But part of the reason I wrote the book was to raise the awareness of this powerful and important other side of primary research called qualitative research, and just how important it really is, and raise the visibility of this methodology to from a red-headed stepchild to its more pedestal quantitative methodology. And
And for qualitative research, you're going out and you're asking questions to different demographics,
right,
and
let
you're
me
asking them. Go for it.
yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't get to explain that difference. No, the difference between qualitative research and quantitative research is vast. Okay. Quantitative research is the methodology that involves large numbers, large base sizes, and statistical reliability and predictability. How does it work? If you look at the number of registered voters in the US, I don't know, it's about 160, 180,000 people. Excuse me. From 1,300 or 1,700 interviews, we can get predictions. We can predict
Right.
to a population of several 100 million, right? Qualitative research is completely different. It is the art or the depth of information. It's really trying to understand something. So I have a beautiful analogy here,
Mm.
and that is this. If you're in a forest and you want to understand how many trees have bark disease, you need to talk to several hundred trees. If, on the other hand, you want to understand how photosynthesis works, the process of light coming down through the leaves, making them green, you only need to talk to a couple trees because it's a very complex process that you're trying to understand.
Mm.
And that's what I do. Does that make sense?
It does. And why would a corporate that's thinking about developing a new product line, why would they come to you? Like, what's the angle for a company to come to you when it comes to like their product development cycle?
Great question. Objectivity and industry knowledge. So when I work with somebody, I'm usually working with either a program manager or a market research manager, or somebody who may or may not have my skills, but their job is to manage me and the budget, right? My job, that's where the rubber meets the road. My job is to get them the information they hired me to do.
Mm.
Okay.
Mm.
And it's two very different jobs. And they hire me because I have no vested interest in their product or service. I'm hired to be objective and to give this
Mm.
product and service a fair shot at being
Yeah.
evaluated. So I speak for the product, I speak for the customers.
And you have to tell people, your clients, sometimes difficult answers to what your research is finding, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah, and it's like I was saying before we talked on the podcast, and people say, "What do you do for a living?" And I say, "Oh, I tell people that their babies are ugly." And that's what I do. And it's these companies spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to hear bad news sometimes. But the good news in that is that they haven't spent millions designing, marketing, tooling, manufacturing, fulfilling a product. And once they do that without research, oh man, you can pay me now or you can pay me later after that happens.
Yeah.
But after that happens, it's a disaster. So we're insurance.
Mm.
And your viewers can use these techniques to talk to their customers and ask them, where are we weak? Where can we improve? How do we improve? All sorts of things, pricing.
So what about these guys like your Steve Jobs, who, and your Henry Ford said, if I was going to do what people wanted, I would have made a faster horse, or no one knew they needed an iPod before. And these sort of like generational unique people that go past the research and find their own paths that people actually want that they didn't know they wanted.
If everybody were Henry Ford and Steve Jobs, we'd all be out of business, right? And these guys come around once a century, and look
Yeah,
at Elon
absolutely.
Musk. Hard to tell these
Yeah,
guys they're wrong. They're worth billions. They're going to believe me. We had this problem doing research for wealthy private equity firms. They just, you know, rung the bell several times and felt like they knew more than anybody. But not everybody is like that. And today, Apple has an enormous research staff. They do
yeah,
tons of research. And it's how you do the research. It's like anything else. You can have really bad research, you can have really good research. And companies spend a lot to ensure that they're communicating to their target audience. What are you saying to your customers? How are you saying it? Where are you saying it? How often are you saying it? What do they think of what you're saying? So we help companies in a variety of ways.
so I'm interested about this non-verbal aspect of your research, which seems to be, when I was doing the research on you and your business, is something very important that you've built into your research. First question is, how have you built that into your research and how do you successfully do it? And the second question is a little bit more lighthearted. Can you switch it off? Can you switch off your analysis side of doing the non-verbal research?
Yeah, it's rare. I'm just built that way. And other people who are trained like me say the same thing. Once they see it, it's like speaking another language, really.
Mm,
It's a language that anybody can speak. Integrating into the business is a great question. And there's several examples I can give you. One is we not only integrated body language into the research, but the use of artificial intelligence
right.
also in the research. Now, I'm trained to spot the slightest facial emotions, are called facial microexpressions. They're involuntary emotional leakage on the face that you can't control. Okay. I'm trained to spot that. So when I'm talking to somebody and I see them do that, my antenna goes up. Now, the AI algorithm that we have is trained to do the same thing that I am. It's trained to see the emotion. So we did a study amongst very technical design engineers. You know what a design engineer is?
Do you mean like for designing a new product or service?
Yeah,
Is that what you mean?
exactly.
Yeah,
These are very highly technical people
yeah.
that take a semiconductor, put it on a board in a
Mm,
product that their company makes that
yeah.
eventually gets shipped. So they're buying from companies like Intel and AMD and
Mm,
Nvidia and all these guys, Texas
mm,
Instruments, right? It's long been thought that these guys don't emote, that they're just rational, that they're linear, and they just work on specifications, and that's it. You just can't get them to emote. And part of the issue was with one of these manufacturers that hired us. They wanted to understand what the new generation of design engineers felt about, of all things, sustainability.
mm.
Okay. In other words, when a design engineer chooses a part, does he consider the sustainability practices of the manufacturer from whom he buys? We went into this study to test this, and we asked design engineer after design engineer after, we must talk to 30 of these guys. And invariably they would say, oh, yeah, sustainability is important. But we would see that it wasn't. We
Yeah,
would see a sign of contempt, which looks like an asymmetrical smile. We would see a
right.
flash of anger. We would see surprise because nobody had ever asked them about sustainability.
Mm,
And we could see the contradictions. And if I had more time, I could actually show you the research findings. We actually mapped this out and graph it. It looks like a
right.
emotional EKG
Mm, mm,
of
mm,
happiness, engagement,
mm.
sadness. And we measured all that, right? What we learned was nobody likes to admit that they're against sustainability,
Yeah.
right? So that was at play. But when we dug deeper and we found out that these guys weren't getting their parts for 6 months or 8 months or 12 months, they didn't really care about sustainability and they didn't really want to
Yeah.
hear about it.
Right.
In fact, they were angry about that.
Mm.
And so to throw sustainability at them just throws. So that's one instance where we were able to convince a
Mm.
board of directors that was nervous about sustainability that it's okay. You can talk about it, but it's not your first best punch.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And we'll get into more of that soon. But I want to focus on your book. So it's called Backbone. And let's talk about the situation you were in a Christmas Eve. Was it 2016 that
15.
you 15, sorry, that you were nearly left paralyzed. Tell me that story, please.
Yeah, without being a spoiler, um, the long and short of it is we had a family gathering at our house in California, Northern California. And I ended up trying to break up a horrific fight between two former family members. And I myself was brutally attacked by one of them, body slammed so hard that my spine cracked instantly. So from 2015 to last year, I have undergone 5 major spinal surgeries. In fact, I'm still recovering right now. And I tell the story as a way to hone in on one of the salient characteristics of doing the job that I do, which is having grit.
Mm.
And I talk about this job, about getting on an airplane, flying around the world, and talking to people, and doing this week after week after week requires stamina and grit and the focus as well.
Mm.
So I wanted to talk about my resilience and hope that it helps others get back up.
But we are talking this because I know you outside of this conversation, and I know you've talked about happened to you, and like you showed us pictures of having your head shaved and being in hospital, and the when you came back to the community, you were very much like you were fixed in place where on your seat that you were sitting on. So this is really traumatic stuff that you've been through. How did you get up every day after multiple operations? And you talk about grit. How did you get up and keep fighting and keep moving forward on those multiple operations that you had? Oh, nice.
My wife, Svetlana, is because of her, I wrote the book. I was able to write the book. And people that know me know that when I was on the research trail, I was a gritty guy. I can conduct 70, 60-minute interviews in 4 time zones, 2 countries in 5 days. That's a lot of work.
Mm.
And traveling in between on an airplane.
Mm.
A lot of money, but it's a lot of work. So I
Mm.
had that innate drive anyway. And it was a way for me to get up this book. It was a way for me. I wrote a lot of it in bed, but slowly I began to heal and get up and get in. Honestly, some of the book had to be erased because I had written it while I was on opiates and none of it was true. So we're like, what? Where did that happen? And that's honest. That's just what it was
Yeah.
like. But it was, we're still not done. The whole idea is stay out of a wheelchair. My mother, I tell this book in the story, but my mother, uh, at the age of 70, had a 9-hour spinal surgery where they inserted a titanium rod in her spine. And it's a brutal surgery. She didn't survive. 6 weeks later, she passed away. So I had that weighing in on me and my family as well, you know. So But we punched through. I have an amazing wife. You read the acknowledgments of my book, and you can see what this poor woman had to do to put up with me.
So
I'm
just talk
super
about your
fortunate.
wife. Just talk about your wife and your family and the support that they've given you, because I'm very thankful to have my kids and my wife, and we talked about before we came on about my dogs and things like that, having my family around me. Just talk a little bit more, like you said, about the acknowledgements in the book, the support they've given you,
I'll
and
tell you a little bit about my wife. She sees this. I'm probably in trouble, but I'll just blame you. I met Svetlana through a mutual friend shortly after my first surgery, and she's Russian citizen and a U.S. citizen, and she has an engineering degree, and she has 3 master's degrees. She's a highly trained classical pianist, and we had absolutely nothing in common. And we met, and I fell head over heels immediately. She wasn't so sure about me. I think today she still isn't. But the point is, she took me to Russia before the war, and I met her family and friends. And oh my Lord, what a wonderful country it is! If you take the government away, the
Mm,
most wonderful people. And now that we're married, I have family in Moscow, and it's serious there. The point is, Svetlana grew some sharp elbows and edged her way into my New York family
mm,
and just took care of me from day one. And that's the reality of it. There's no other. My daughter, Maddie, she's going to be married next year. She flew in to help. Um, my son, Michael, my son, Sasha, shaved my head not once, but twice. We had a ritual around it because when you get spinal surgery, especially up in the neck area, you can't. Worrying about your hair is a pain. So I've shaved my head now so many times, and we made a lot of fun out of it. You do what you can. You try and have some humor. I
yeah,
talk about that in the book.
yeah.
You know,
It's important because
it is.
humor brings lightens. You're going through some serious stuff with the operations, and just to lighten the mood with, I saw pictures of them shaving patterns into your hair, and doing what do you call it, the vicar look, where you had the shaved head. It was so lovely. I feel very privileged to have been part of that and seeing the the love and the care and the humor that your family gave you in support of serious operations. Yeah.
Yeah, it hasn't been easy on anybody. And the Boss Academy, let me tell you, I've just had people just reach out from all over the world, Africa, Europe, Asia, and it's just been so heartwarming. And the Boss
Yeah.
Academy and Paul has
Yeah.
been super supportive. So, in fact, we're going to be announcing the book on October the 9th. We're going to send out a notice and where to get it. But in the acknowledgments, I say, despite authorial attribution, the book is never about one person. Tom and Yvonne were incredible book editors and publishers.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're talking about, so we're part of the same community called Boss Academy. It's run
Correct.
by
Yeah.
Paul Kirsch, and there's people from all over the world, a lot of Americans in that group as well. And
Correct.
it's a what I love about that group is it's so supportive. People are
Yeah.
really rooting for you in that group.
People are just genuine. They're really
Yeah.
genuine. And I think we all come from the mindset that you only get as good as you give.
Yeah.
If you don't make yourself accessible and you try and nickel and dime everybody,
Mm,
it just isn't going to work. People,
yeah.
and this is the other part of the book, I talk a lot about nonverbal intelligence and determining not when people lie, but when they're uncomfortable. Because
Mm,
the same things that make you look like a liar are the same things that you look like when you're uncomfortable. And a lot of people have gone to jail because of that. So We are with our spouse or significant other because we're comfortable. We go to a particular restaurant because we like the food. You walk in, they say, "Hey, Mark, how are you?" And you're comfortable. You go to a certain store because it's all about comfort. And so companies need to create comfort with their employees and their customers.
Yeah. And that's a lot of what this show is about, is talking about customers and clients and how we interact with them. And I think the research that you do is so powerful to understand your clients because, like we mentioned, people like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk and Henry Ford who were pioneers, but the rest of the reality is that we need to understand the clients that we are trying to, our target market that we're trying to reach. How do you think that these companies that you work with come into relationships or interactions with you and come in sometimes with the wrong mentality or the wrong starting point? How do you overcome that?
I'm not sure I understand, Mark.
So what I'm wondering is that when like you said to me you have to tell people that they've got ugly babies. When
Oh,
you're going
yeah.
into those sort of new relationships with people, how do you overcome those obstacles and those difficulties when you're talking to those people?
I have to say that usually by the time people come to us, they're really willing to hear the truth, the good, bad, and the ugly, because
Yeah.
they've either failed or been snookered or something. And we wouldn't be in business this long if we were telling people exactly what they want to hear. Let me
Mm.
tell you the number of really cool products that never made it to the market for a variety of reasons that
Oh,
we
do
help
tell.
save.
Spill it. I want to hear a couple of examples.
Oh, okay. Here's one. This is a virtual reality set
Right.
developed. These were virtual reality goggles
Yeah.
that were not as big as what Facebook has just or
Yeah. The
Meta has just
Oculus.
introduced,
Yeah.
right? So these are very
Yeah.
slim. They have microprocessor produced images in them, the same technology that's used with projectors. The glasses are very dark, and when you look at them, it's amazing, Mark. You can absolutely see a movie, and it feels like you're in a big screen. It's phenomenal.
Mm. Mm.
And these glasses were designed for travel, right?
Right.
And it was a Japanese company was convinced that all the people that ride the trains and airplanes would wear these.
Right.
And what we found in talking to people, New York, California, Washington, Atlanta, nobody's going to wear these on
All
a
the time.
train because of safety reasons, because it was
Mm.
so dark, because it got earplug. It's just not safe. Maybe on an airplane, but then are they compatible? And they were so deflated. They were so deflated about this, but it was obvious. It's hard to argue when people are going, "Yeah, great, this is super. I'm not going to buy
Mm.
these. Why not? I'm not wearing these on BART. Are you kidding me?"
Mm.
BART's the
Mm.
Bay Area rapid transit system here, where
Okay. Right.
you're lucky to get off alive every stop. Yeah.
So answer me one thing. So I've got an example of something that has been going around my head. There's a guy in the UK called Rory Sutherland who he talks about the behaviors and the psychology of marketing and business. And one of the things he was talking about was Google Glass. So the glasses that Google made. And he said that was not a product problem that made them unsuccessful. It was a marketing problem that made them unsuccessful. And I was seeing on social media, Meta are just bringing out this new glasses. So a long-winded way of asking you, what's your view on, because you're looking at research of people in expertise that can help define a product, is marketing a bad word for you? How do you interweave your research, knowledge, and your experience with having good or bad marketing?
Marketing makes the world go around, my friend.
True.
Look, there's no amount of good marketing that can move a crappy product or a cold product. It just
I don't
can't.
know. I don't know. I know people that have had really crappy ideas that have had really good marketing
All right.
as successful.
The pet rock. Have you heard of this?
No.
There was a guy in California that invented the pet rock, and he went to rock quarries and he shined them up
Right.
and he put them in boxes and he sold them, and he was an instant millionaire. Okay,
Right.
that's great. My point is that a lot of times these products are not well thought out, and especially with Google, this whole thing is still evolving. You got the
Mm.
Google glasses that early indications where people were looking like glass holes, right?
Yeah.
That's what they were called. But we're still evolving. And this whole meta thing, this is a wonderful application
Mm.
if you want to lay on your back and look up and do your computing that way. But if you want to hold
Yeah.
this thing on your head, it weighs a lot. So I
Mm.
expect this technology to eventually get there, just
Right.
like all the other technology has.
Yeah.
It'll happen.
No, that's very true. Back to your book. I want to talk, how do you interweave your story about what happened with the operations? How do you interweave in your book the market research that brings into, that fleshes and makes the story of the book?
The book really is about my life's experiences beyond the attack. Okay. I've been many things in my lifetime. I was a journalist, trying to be a political journalist. I went to graduate school at Cal to be a writer, studied modern American literature. I fell in love with research when I worked for a guy by the name of Regis McKenna, who, by the way, had a famous advertising agency and public relations agency, and one of their early clients was Steve Jobs at Apple Computer.
Right.
So each one of those experiences helped create a trait that I think is important to do this job.
Mm.
Okay. In terms of, let's talk about synthesizing complexity. That's one of the traits. Okay. Now, what does that mean? When you're in my position and you're running around and you're talking to people and you're trying to explain technical products to them, you better know how that product works from
Mm.
the inside out, especially if you're
Mm.
demonstrating them, right?
Mm.
And synthesizing complexity is a must, especially when you're working with products like beverage alcohol. The wine industry is extremely complex, and the semiconductor industry, extremely complex. And when I took a detour into the seminary and studied
I
theology,
saw. Yes, I saw. Yeah.
and that was my introduction into, oh man, talk about complexity, the study of God dwarfs every other subject known to man in terms of complexity. And when I came out on the other side of my doctorate, I was older, but really came out of that feeling like, wow, that if I could do that, I can help any product, any company. And I tell people you don't have to go into the seminary, but what you need to do is study something complex. Learn how
Mm.
to analyze complexity, break it apart piece by piece. Don't be afraid of it.
So that's one of the reasons that I think colleges, universities still, even though most people never use their what they learn in their college degrees, it actually gives people a critical thought, a critical way of approaching situations. Now, there's
Right.
lots of reasons to not send your kid to university, cost and all those sorts of things, but it does give a person a critical thought. And as when I was researching political science, journalism, religious studies, all of these subjects are very deep, very complex, need different skill sets. So, political science than journalism, although you melded the two together. To be a journalist and think critically as a journalist is an incredibly difficult skill set. How have all these jigsaw pieces that you've been involved in made you a better researcher?
Oh, that's part of the book and a very astute question because as a journalist, number one, you must be curious. Same with research. With a journalist, you must deal with facts. Same with research. With journalism, you must be objective and fair. Same with research. With journalism, you need to prepare. You're not going to go into an interview and not prepare to interview a subject. Same with
Mm.
research. So they're very similar. And I don't, even though I had to cover some horrific stories that I talk about in the book that soured me on research, the same skills that I learned in research, I'm still using today, or in journalism, I'm still using today in research. Now, I went to Berkeley to study modern American literature. How does that work for me now? Today, research is not about numbers. It's about narrative. A lot of marketing, you talk
Mm.
about narrative, and writing and
Yeah.
blogging has become way more important than it ever has. Same in a
Yeah.
research business. We're not throwing decks of 100 slides at people anymore. We're boiling it down into a nice, crisp story. Got to know how to write to do that.
So, what would a product developer? Because when I was looking at the research, you said that a product developer, so someone who's building products, building the narrative around it. Why should a product developer read your book?
I think that if they have a product or a service that's going to cost them a lot of money, they need to ask themselves, what's the cost of the wrong decision? And can I help mitigate that?
Mm.
And if the cost of a wrong decision is like millions of dollars, they
Mm.
should call me, because I tell people to earmark between 1% and 5% of their overall budget to help measure what it is they're trying to. Now,
Right.
if their product development spend is 50,000, they probably should do the research themselves. So it really depends, but they do not want to introduce a product without market feedback, and my book will help them understand how to approach it, how to get people to be frank with you, how to hone your communication skills.
So what I understand from the book is there's almost two sides to it. There's your personal journey story that's part interwoven into the book, and there's also how you've been a positive influence as a market researcher, as a qualitative researcher. Is that a fair assessment that you have interwoven them both? I'm trying to give
Yeah,
people an idea for when they're thinking about buying your book. Is that a fair assessment,
it
interwoven
is. And
between personal story as well?
it really is. But I thought about this. My original thought was maybe I should just write a manual
Mm,
on focus groups. And
mm,
then I thought, who's going to buy that? And then I thought, I have a pretty interesting background. I really
yeah,
do. And I thought, if I could figure out a way to talk about my interesting background and the things I've seen and done, I could tease out that qualitative research story. And that's what we did. And we want to market it to professors of market research who are teaching quantitative methodology, or professors of organizational psychology are heavily quantitative, but I wonder about their qualitative. So when I was growing up, there were hardly any market research degrees from colleges.
right.
Today, that's a different story, right? So you can go get a degree in
Mm.
market research. But are they teaching qualitative research? We don't think there's a book like this out there. I think this is pretty unique. And I got some super killer testimonials.
Amazing.
Yeah. So I'm super excited about that.
Is there a reveal of who the
Yeah, I
testimonials
can
were
tell you.
from?
I can tell you. You want to talk to some people who know Steve Jobs?
Yeah.
Regis McKenna himself has endorsed the book. When you study Steve Jobs, you will realize that he had a very faithful confidant for his whole career, and her name was Andy Cunningham. You should have her on your podcast.
Okay.
Andy worked at Regis with me many years ago. She handled the Apple account with Steve Jobs' right hand gal. And if you want an introduction, I'd be happy to. She's
That'd be
endorsed the book.
amazing.
She wrote a book called Get to Aha, big bookseller. We got Michael Malone, friend of mine who wrote the book on Intel, plus several others. Joe Navarro, ex FBI agent and my mentor, and lots of others. We it's so humbling. I was terrified to release this book, Mark. I really was.
I totally understand. It's you're exposing yourself and your story, as well as all of your knowledge and experience and expertise you've got as a researcher. You're exposing everything. I totally get that. People have said to me that I should write a book, and I've always shied away from it because I like doing this. I like talking to my guests and doing solo stuff, talking about things that interest me, and that feels very natural and it feels very easy, well, relatively easy, but like it's a more natural medium for me. And writing a book feels totally overwhelming. So I understand that, and I'm really glad that you've done this because I think you've got an
I
incredible story.
thank you. I mean, I have to say that when I started this project, the book felt overwhelming until we began to break it out, get an outline chapter by chapter. It was
Right.
just like that. It was very organized. We paced it because I wasn't feeling well.
Mm,
Sometimes I just couldn't write. And so we'd have to wait. That's why it took 18 months.
right.
So, and that's why I didn't tell anybody for 18 months because I didn't know I'd be able to do it. But I have to say that now the book's written, I think the hard part is talking about it and marketing it. Ugh, it's a
So,
lot of
what?
work.
Well, it
It's a
is a
lot
lot
of
of work,
work.
but
It's
yeah.
a lot of work, and you're out there. It's like having a baby. It's like you give them birth to something, and now the
Thank you, David. Coming to the end of the interview, I've asked the same 6 questions to all of my guests. They're quick fire questions. They don't need a quick fire answer. The first question is, what's the best decision that you've made?
marry my wife, Svetlana.
Yeah.
Yeah, I married up, and I'm lucky. That's decision number one.
Were you married before? Do you mind me asking?
Yeah. Yes, I was. Yeah.
So
Um,
that,
but this is true love when you put up with this stuff and you help
yeah,
somebody who is really suffering. So, yeah, best thing is I'm thrilled about the book. Now that it's out, I'm super excited. Yeah,
brilliant.
but
What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
you're never as bad as people say you are, and you're never as good as people say you are. So try not to get wrapped around the axle. And for God's sake, if you're going to put something on LinkedIn, research it.
Mm,
Look, part of what drives me is people actually believe what I say. And along with that comes a huge responsibility to be honest and to be factual. And when I say something, I back it up with research. Do the same because everybody has opinions. Opinions are like rear ends. Everybody has one, and most of them stink. So
So it's a really interesting this thing Ricky Gervais has talked about, British comedian, that
I love him.
yeah, there's a difference between people's opinions and facts. You can
Right.
criticize my view, my opinion on something, but you can't criticize a fact. It's a really, and I think that's essentially part of what you're talking about is that, as you say, you should research what you're doing. But I love that idea of you're never as good as your biggest fan, and you're never as bad as your biggest critic.
You're just human like everybody else. Look, one of the biggest things that I studied in the seminary was the incorrect use of scripture and how bastardized and edited it has become. And one of the things that's out there is don't judge. Don't judge me, right? Let's think about that for a minute. The Bible asks you to choose between good and evil. So you must judge. So judgment is a part of scripture, but it's how you judge. Is it the judgment of licentiousness where you say, hey, Mark, not only is your blog stupid, but so are you? That's mean spirited.
Yeah.
Or is it destructive or constructive? So feedback is judgment. So let's get over that and let's do it right,
But doing it
which
in a
is, of course,
positive way is part of the way that you give people feedback. And it's
right.
something that in businesses can be done really badly if people are not spoken about maybe their faults or maybe the way that they're communicating with people. And I talk to people that run businesses, and I talk to people, managers, and they really need to be upskilled on how to give constructive feedback, and that doesn't like really knock people's
Right.
confidence.
Who wants to get up and work and bleed for a toxic boss that constantly denigrates you?
Yeah,
Nobody wants to do that.
yeah,
And unfortunately, that's what we see because people just aren't schooled in communications and realizing they're going to get way more out of somebody if they're comfortable than if they're uncomfortable. It just seems like common sense to me. Like HR. Oh man, if you run a company and you're have an HR person, they better be trained in body language because every time you hire the wrong toxic person,
yeah,
the narcissistic, complaining, whining person that sucks the soul out of your company,
yeah,
every time you do that, it costs 30% of their salary to fix that problem
yeah,
when you might have been able to spot it.
yeah. And unfortunately, common sense isn't that common, is it?
It is not. No, it
I
really
love that
isn't.
saying.
And I fall prey to it. Let me tell you, it's easier. Anybody that knows me well knows that I don't always communicate in the nicest way. So it's very difficult to do,
Mm,
especially when you're super passionate about something.
mm, mm.
I'm just like everybody else.
Yeah. Right. Next question. Who's helped you most in your career?
I'd have to say Joe Navarro and colleague of mine, Mark Skillings. Joe is FBI body language mentor, and Mark is a rather well-known ex-semiconductor marketing executive that's helped guide me throughout the years. And my colleague Angela at Merrill Research, we've been together for 25 years. She handles the quantitative portion
Right.
of our duo.
Amazing. Tell me about a regret that you have.
Oh boy, I regret that I didn't do this earlier. I regret that it took me so long to write a book. Although I realize that I couldn't have written the book earlier, although I wanted to. And the reason I couldn't, because I wouldn't have all these life experiences.
Mm,
Look, when you look at some of the great modern American writers, Hemingway,
mm,
Faulkner, Dos Passos, Steinbeck, right? All those guys were journalists
mm,
before.
mm.
And it's important.
It is. And I'm going to ask you I don't know if this is going to be a hard hitting question about a regret. Do you regret intervening in that fight?
No. And here's why, because that's a great question. I regret being injured for
Yes.
sure. Nobody, I think I'd be lying if I said I didn't regret that. Of course, I regretted being injured, but this was a problem that kept bubbling up over the years and finally came to a head in my house, in my own home, in front of my family. That wasn't going to happen. I didn't care who it was. Not going
Right.
to be doing that in
Right.
my house. So, no, I don't regret that. It's the right thing. And sometimes the right thing doesn't turn out right,
Yeah.
or it hurts, or it costs you money.
Yeah.
But I couldn't let that go on. It was vicious.
Yeah. Okay. What are you most proud of?
No, no, I'm still here.
And you should be.
I'm proud that I can. I'm not. I'm proud that our company is still in existence. Hasn't been easy. I'm proud we got the book out, and I'm proud I get to talk about something that's been bubbling up inside me for the longest time, and that is teaching and bringing to the attention to a new generation of interviewers nonverbal intelligence. And you
Yeah.
sprinkle a little AI on that, and it becomes super powerful.
Next
So
question. What is your why? Why do you do what you do?
I'm just curious. I
Mm,
just The first chapter of the book talks about me getting up I was born at 6 a.m. in Staten Island, and my parents wanted to strangle me because every morning I would be up at 5:30, 6 o'clock
Mm.
on my crib, and that pattern continued throughout my life. I just couldn't sleep in. And so while you're up, you begin to get busy. You realize I got a lot of time on my hands here.
Mm.
And so I was able to accomplish a lot. I just loved journalism. I loved Berkeley. I loved research. I fell in love with research, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. And I'm very fortunate what I do. And
Yes.
that's the key.
Next question. What does legacy mean to you?
Legacy, that's a good question. I don't worry about that much. What are they going to write on my headstone and go away? Leave me alone. I would love to make a dent, using a Steve Jobs metaphor. I'd love to make a dent in qualitative research where somebody wakes up and goes, Schneer's right. He's
Mm.
right. We need to be doing more of this. I'm
Mm.
convinced that this is the way to go, and that I think it'll catch on, especially in today's world where the truth
Yeah.
is elusive.
Yeah, absolutely. And lastly, where can people find out about you, find more about you, or reach out to you and maybe find the book?
That is awesome. I wish I could give them the Amazon link now, but the book actually in Amazon, just ready to be published any minute. They're checking that we're not violating any Amazon stuff. But the best way to know when this is available is to hit me on LinkedIn. I'm all over LinkedIn like a cheap suit. So if you can't find me on LinkedIn, then you really don't know how to use LinkedIn. So
Yeah.
please reach out to me and we'll let you know when the book is available.
Look, thank you, David. Thank you so much for your time today. It's a truly inspiring and important message and story that you've got. And I feel very privileged to have you part of my network and part of my community. So just thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you.
It's my pleasure. Congratulations with the podcast and wish you continued success. So thanks again. And let me know if you want to do it again. We got much more to talk about.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Thank you so much for your time.